This is Pinata Island. It's the most incredible place in the world, where living Pinata roam wild. In the middle of the island is Pinata Central. It's the place where Pinata packed with candy go, so they can be sent to parties all over the world. Around Pinata Central are lots of gardens, and the people who live on Pinata Island have learned how to care for the land so the wild Pinata will stay in the gardens and fill up with candy. Candy-filled Pinata can then be sent up to Pinata Central, so each party receives the Pinata that suits it best. Pinata love parties. When they break open, it's like having 5 birthdays all at once. After the party, the Pinata return to Pinata Island to fill up with candy and go to the next party. This is an amazing island, and my garden was the most amazing place on this island. I was famous here, but some Pester took a dislike to me. To cut a long story short, all my hard work was ruined. I often wish that I was still young and strong enough to put the garden back in order, but those days are gone. Now the garden is yours, and you're facing a challenge that even I might not be able to beat. My name is Jardinero. You've probably heard of me, and if you haven't, then you should have. I am the best gardener on Pinata Island. Even after all this time, there's no one as good as I was. The land that you are messing about with used to be my garden. I could make any plant grow and have any Pinata stay in the garden. Well, apart from one Pinata. Let's face it, if I couldn't get one, no one else could. Now, forget about all that. You've got a long way to go before you can even call this a garden. Not long after I started the garden, I met my wonderful wife. She worked on the ships which traded Pinata for other goods. This was in the days when Pinata only left the island by boat. Pinata Central hadn't been built then. We got married the day that the first parts arrived to build Pinata Central. Mother, my wife, stayed on the island for a whole year, and our first child was born. We called him Stardust. When Stardust was 2 years old, my wife had to go back to sea. Pinata Central had installed the first cannonata, and there were requests for more Pinata than ever before. My garden was already impressive, and I could supply Pinata Central with really good Pinata. With Mother gone, I set about teaching little Stardust about Pinata and making the best garden in Pinata Island history. Little Stardust grew quickly, just like my garden. I hired a helper called Lester to do some of the less skillful jobs in the garden. He was okay, but he was always writing things down, drawing pictures and making plans. I'd ask him to do something and he'd mess it up. I'd tell him how to do it properly and he'd write it all down. If he listened more and wrote less, he might have been more useful. I also found him trying to take shortcuts. He'd miss out some important work just so he could pack an extra couple of Pinata into a crate to Pinata Central. Stardust was learning more and more every day, which was a good job because I found Lester messing around with sweets. One afternoon, I was walking down past the gooseberry bushes when I found Lester stirring a pot of sticky red and black liquid, which smelled sour. The secret of Happy Pinata is good candy. It's one shortcut you can't afford to take. Start messing with candy, and who knows what effect it would have on a Pinata. I sacked Lester on the spot, and little Stardust took over his job. Replaced by a little boy! Lester was quite angry about it, but I knew that Pinata Central only wanted the best Pinata. It was a good job that Stardust was such a natural gardener, like his dad, because our little family soon had a new member. Our second child, Leafos, was born during Mother's shore leave. Mother had to go back to sea very soon after Leafos was born. I brought up Leafos, continued Stardust training, and maintained my fantastic garden. Leafos loved the garden so much she used to take flowers into her room at night. And it didn't stop there. She tried to take a marzipan to bed one night, and I had to draw the line. The next day I gave her some paper and pencils, and she started drawing all the things she saw in the garden, so she could put them up in her room. As she got older, she wrote about the plants and Pinata as well as drawing pictures. In next to no time, her walls were covered with sketches and writing, so we made a book to keep it all in. That was the start of my journal, where a record of everything in the garden was kept. In the old days, I was an expert romance dancer. Mother was caught by surprise, and my second daughter was born at sea. Mother named her after the migrating storks that followed the ship. Little Stalkus spent all her early years on the ships with Mother. She was taught to read by sailors and the comic books they collected. She grew up running around the decks, pretending to have superpowers. In the old days, the Pinata had to fetch their own eggs from Egg Mountain. Lots of eggs were broken before the parents could roll them home. Pinata Central needed more pinatas to fill all the party requests in all the gardens. Even mine couldn't romance the pinatas fast enough. When Mother's ship docked, Stalkus came to the garden. She played and worked in the garden with Leafos and Stardust until one day Stalkus went missing. We called for her, but she didn't show up until 2 bunnycombs had done their romance dance. Swooping down from Egg Mountain with her cloak flapping behind her, Stalkus flew into the garden and gently dropped off the bunnycomb eggs, safe and sound, into the garden. Overnight, the Pinata romance dance problem was solved. Every Pinata knew that its egg would be delivered safely. Stalkus had become Pinata Island's very own superhero. Pinata Central had a regular supply of common pinata types, but my garden was the only place to get the really unusual pinata. I worked in the garden with my family. Mother visited as often as she could. Everything was close to perfect, and then my youngest son, Sidos, arrived, like the cherry on the cake. Mother gave up sailing, and we lived as a family in and around the garden for a short time. Sidos started to look after a shelly bean, then 2, and soon he had romanced them. He was very advanced for such a little boy, like a chip off the old man's block. Sidos and his family of shelly beans continued to spend lots of time together. When Pinata Central requested some shelly bean pinatas, Sidos happily sent the whole family. Sidos had taught the shelly beans all sorts of tricks, including the Tower of Shelly Beans and the Shelly Bean Burst. Those little shelly beans must have put on quite a show, because when they came home, there was suddenly a big demand for shelly bean pinatas. Obviously, Sidos followed in his dad's footsteps, becoming a pinata expert before he could talk properly. You probably heard I was the most successful gardener on Pinata Island, and that's not a boast, it's a fact. Suddenly, a rumor started that there was one pinata I hadn't managed to capture. I laughed when people asked me about it, but it was starting to bug me. Surely, if anyone could lure a Dragonarsh into the garden, it was me. I was lucky, though. My old helper, Lester, showed up one day with an old map he'd said he'd found. The map showed a route over the sea to a little island where a wise man was supposed to live. Lester said that this man was the last known person to ever see a Dragonarsh, and that he held the secrets to attracting one to a garden. I immediately started planning a trip. Mother would captain the ship to take us to the old man's island. Stardust was able to look after the garden with the help of Leafos. Stalkus would keep an eye out for little Sidos until we returned. I was determined to prove once and for all that I was the greatest gardener the Pinata Island had ever seen. Mother was a brilliant captain. All her years at sea had made her able to navigate by the stars and read signs of the coming weather. She followed the course marked on the tatty little map until we found the island. As we approached, Mother noticed the telltale signs of shallow rocks. She tried to navigate through them, but a freak wave smashed the boat against a huge, jagged boulder. I fell overboard, and Mother, clinging to the boat, was swept back out to sea. I'm a tough old boot, though, and I made it to safety, stranded on the beach of the strange island. I was sure Mother would be fine. She really is an expert sailor. Meanwhile, back on Pinata Island, things were taking a turn for the worse. Lester approached Stalkus with an offer of help while I was away. Lester claimed he had made some new red and black sweets that were a shortcut to attracting Pinata. He invited Stalkus over to his lair in the jungle to try them for himself. I was washed up on the beach, and when I tried to move, my legs wouldn't do as they were told. I struggled to the middle of the island. There was a shabby hut with an old man sitting outside. "Welcome to my island," he said. I could have survived on my own, but he looked like he needed help. I crawled over to him and told him about my incredible adventure to find a Dragonarsh. The old man scratched his chin and then said, "I think you've been tricked." I suddenly realized that I had abandoned the children to a crooked pest of a man. I demanded that the old man help me to get home. "It's rather rude to rush off," said the old man. "I'm 65, you know, and I still have all my own teeth. I don't get much company these days, so why don't you stop for a chat, and I'll do my best to help you out." I spent the afternoon drinking tea and listening to the old man. It turned out he was a diggerling, and for years he had been digging strange and wonderful objects out of the ground. One object was a large egg, which, as the old man put it, was as close as he'd ever been to a Dragonarsh. Eventually, the diggerling carried me down to the coast. He had a boat there that he used to visit his daughter, who lived on Pinata Island. The miner agreed to sail me home past the treacherous rocks and back to my family. The old man dropped me off at the docks, and I built myself this chair out of old scrap I found. I sped down to the garden. It was like my worst nightmare come true. Pinata homes were smashed, the plants had all dried up, and the soil had been baked as hard as concrete. Leafos was hiding in the house. She explained that Stalkus had gone into the jungle to meet Lester. As soon as he was out of sight, a gang of ruffians had arrived. They smashed up the garden, ripped my journal into pieces, and put all of the Pinata in a crate and sent them to Lester. No, I can't call him Lester anymore. Pester is a better name for him. Stalkus had stayed safe on Egg Mountain, and she had no choice but to keep on delivering eggs to other gardens. Little Sidos had run into the swamp with his shelly beans. They were his only family for some time. This seems to have really affected him. Now he loves seeds, just like the shelly beans do, and he calls himself Seedos. Stalkus hasn't been seen since he went into the jungle, but a weird new character now hangs around the garden. He's known as Stalkus, and he's creepy, but sometimes he reminds me of someone I used to know. Mother hasn't returned to Pinata Island. She must be having quite an adventure. And now we're back to where you came in. I can't believe it. It seems like only yesterday when you appeared here on Pinata Island. You didn't look like much of a gardener, and my old garden had seen better days. I never thought that anyone could build a garden as successful as mine, but here we are. You have made most Pinata species resident, grown almost all of the plants, and proved that you are one of the best. If I had a hat, I'd take it off for you.